have to make stuff you don't like, you know, and I have to look at it and say, you know, I think people would like this. I don't, but other people would, and then I make it. I do plates, bowls, serveware, totally functional serveware. I do ornaments, I do some wall hangings, I do some window hangings. I do kind of concentrate on serveware mostly. I actually started way back in probably 1977 in Appleton with just making some small pieces of stained glass, and really enjoyed working with glass and designing with glass, and kept producing stained glass for several years until actually my two sons were old enough to get into it, and I had to put everything away because there are glass fragments all over when you're cutting glass. Put it away for a long time and then got it back out when I was commissioned to do some windows for a person. And kept kind of dabbling in stained glass, but always wanted to try glass fusion, and discovered a coffee shop studio in Maple Grove, Minnesota, and went down there and started the introduction to fusing, and I was hooked immediately. And so I would go down there weekly for classes and taking more advanced classes, different techniques, different things to work with, when finally they told me, buy your own kiln and stay home, which I did. And so I worked with my first kiln for a couple years, and it just wasn't producing enough for me, so I now run 2 kilns, about 24/7, most of the warm season of the year. Well, right now I'm going to demonstrate some of how I design a piece, and I'm going to take you from the very start to the very end. So what I've done is I've pre-selected some colors of glass, and like I said, I like to work in the prairie style, and I like the more subtle tones. So I have some cathedral glass here, which is translucent, and so I'm going to be working in a deep olive green and in a medium amber color, and then in a steel blue. I really like the way these colors go together. They really fall together nicely and complement each other. So when I'm ready to design my plate, and I mentioned that I really like linear things, so I work with a system called the Flying Beetle system. So when I want to cut straight lines, I just measure out what it is I want to cut, and I use this system, which I oil the glass cutter that's inserted here, and I just strip right down that, and then I use what's called a running plier to break the glass on the line that I just cut. I like this for always making sure that my dimensions are the same, my lines are nice and clean. It's a very easy way to cut glass. However, not everything is that easy, and sometimes I need to hand cut and use my hand cutter, and I will just do some swirls in this glass, and I'll look at it and make sure those lines went where I wanted them to go. And again, I'll use my running plier to separate the glass. And when I get everything all cut and ready, that's when I began to design the piece on the glass. And I've got in mind what it is exactly that I want to do with my glass. So once my glass pieces are cut, I'm free to just start with my designs on here. And this one does turn out to be a little bit of a flower design, a prairie flower design, but it's all linear. And like I said, I really enjoy working with linear glass. So once I have everything in place here, then my next step is to glue. Because I talked about how the air currents or the heat currents can move glass around. We use a special glass glue, and we glue every piece in place, so that when it goes into the kiln, it's pretty stable. I can touch most of these and they're not going to move, so I know the heat waves in the kiln are not going to move this piece. So I have just a flat piece of glass here. It has the texture of the flower design on it. You can feel that. But before I even started with this, I did pick up a mold so that I would know exactly what shape and what I wanted, how I wanted to bend it. These are just a couple example of molds, and this one is called a dropout mold. So if I were to put this piece on here and put it back in the kiln to bend it, the inside piece would drop down, which would give me my plate look. And so when we look at the finished piece, we have the dimension here of a plate. It's a great serving platter. So that's the last stage of production, is called the bending or the slumping stage. And I knew that that this particular plate was going to fit this form exactly. So measurements are very careful, because if your piece of glass is a little bit big and you put it in to bend it or slump it, you don't want it going over the edges. So you need your math, you need your good measurements here. So this is what it looks like start to finish, when I cut and design, when I glue it together, when I put it in and flat fuse it, and finally when I slump it and I end up with my final piece, which is a platter. And this is what I call my signature prairie platter. I hope people enjoy watching how we create fused glass. It's a little different technique than stained glass, and so just becoming more aware of the process for people. Most people work out of a studio because they don't run kilns in their home, but at least they become aware of the process and how glass is built and designed and then fused and becomes a functional piece of glass.